couple of things that I noticed was the land prices have gone down, which is good. So there are a lot fewer Western investment bankers and their parties, and a lot fewer racy cars. And as the price has gone down, what I've noticed is a lot of the white-collar, Pakistan and Indian families moving in. And now I see all of my favorite restaurants and grocery stores are packed with people. The Dubai Mall parking lot was completely full last time I was there. I couldn't get reservations at any of my best restaurants. So for me, actually, the land price is going down, and some of these financial types leaving, and then families moving in. Now the money is actually going to the kind of industry that I want to be supported, instead of the kind of bars and kind of crazy stuff that was popular in the past. So I felt like, just in terms of the everyday life, it seemed very vibrant and, very, very strong. But I'm not an economist, and I don't know exactly what the impact of all this is. But do you have any thoughts?
So, the Dubai experiment has been a very interesting one. It went from a very small, almost unknown town to, I remember very distinctly, about 4 or 5 years ago, switching on the television and seeing, Ugly Betty, and Dubai was mentioned as a destination for Vanessa Williams on her vacation. So it grew very, very quickly, became a world-renowned city, and to some degree was a victim of its own success. So we had runaway inflation for a while. It became really difficult to get around and get things done in Dubai, while it had historically been the easiest place in the region to do business, and perhaps in the world. It used to take a few days to set up a business in Dubai. There were almost no legal structures that would prevent you from getting up and running. And just overall, a very welcoming to business place. I think what's happening in Dubai right now is that's being recalibrated again. So we're going back to a very business-friendly environment. There's a realization that for a while, things had gotten too expensive and too difficult and too crowded, and the government now is focused on winning back the entrepreneur and winning back the small business owner and really making the economy vibrant again. Obviously, they have challenges right now. So the economic situation globally is difficult, and Dubai has gotten some pretty negative press. But I think overwhelmingly, the infrastructure and the mindset is so good and so unique that I fundamentally believe that things look very rosy in the medium to long term, even though there's probably some short-term pain to be had.
And to add to that, I think the governments now do realize that there's need to be a lot of focus on entrepreneurship. So in the next 10 years, 90 million jobs have to be created in the Middle East, whereas only 60 million jobs have been created in the past 50 years. So there's a lot of work to do. And one thing that's funny is when I was pitching to VCs in the Valley, they were always saying, you should talk to our, one of our LPs, it's a sovereign wealth fund in Kuwait or something. And there's plenty of money in the region that's being spent in startups in the US, but right now they're trying to look more in-house and looking in the Middle East, because basically of the big problem of putting money in people and not in buildings.
And I also, now to start the stereotyping, I also find that you were saying as the regions are different, it seems like all the advertising agency guys come from Lebanon, and you have a certain category and a type of entrepreneur from Jordan, and I think also it's kind of interesting to see how the different regions specialize in different things. And I think that actually there's some more pan-Arab stuff that can happen. I mean, for me, my biggest shock was we had a big meeting at Al Jazeera of all the Creative Commons, and we did a session, and we got all the Creative Commons leads from Tunisia and all these people, and I got them around the table, and we were arguing about how to translate Creative Commons. And I realized, okay, there's no Arab mind, everybody is like, we can't get anybody to agree. But on the other hand, everybody had a very different kind of core competence. Obviously, each person is different, but each region. And it would also kind of interesting to see, for instance, your business, how, and I think you were saying, I think if you can leverage the strengths, because, Saudi is huge, but they have a censorship thing, right? And how do you use their market to then develop other markets, or the cash from the GCC to fund Jordanian entrepreneurs,
So I think what's been very interesting for us is we've had to operate in each of these markets, and it's something that most human beings are involved in the employment market. So we deal with a lot of corporates and a lot of professionals across the board. And you realize something as basic as recruitment. The requirements are so different from city to city. There are restrictions based on a lot of the things that would be looked at very negatively in the West. So there are restrictions based on nationality, on gender, on language capabilities, etc. So understanding what every city requires and how it's different from every other city is a key to success, we believe, in the region. It's not uniform, and you're absolutely right. The stereotype does not apply for the 300 million people. In fact, beyond the language and for the most part the religious commonality, there's very little that ties the region together. But there's an affinity of culture. People believe they are somehow connected, and the language helps with that. And then as a business, if you're trying to tackle this huge region, you really have to get into the nitty-gritty of every little area and understand what their specific requirements are. And I think, you know, Yemli is having to deal with that on a very regular basis.
Right. I mean, I think in our case it's a bit easier because we're web consumers, so we don't really care about on-the-ground regulations. I mean, there's a funny story about actually language, how it sometimes can become a bad thing. There's a Jordanian company that launched a site, basically it's like the Trouveil of the Middle East, and it was, the name was Bayarat, which means orange fields in Jordanian. It turns out in Saudi it means sewers. So here's the guy who he just missed his biggest opportunity. Saudi Arabia, for example, in the web consumer space, if you don't have that traffic, then you're kind of useless. This is where all the advertising money is being spent. Now also, in terms of looking at the region, mainly you can look at it as, traditionally speaking, the talent comes from the Levant, and the money comes from the GCC. So I think it has been changing a bit recently, but this is how generally you look at it.
Yeah. And one other stereotype, I think, again, this depends a lot on the country, but everybody seems to always talk about the gender issue, you know, and that, you know, in Muslim culture, women aren't, you know, and I think, first of all, a lot of it is very superficial, and a lot of the powerful and smart people that I'm meeting are actually women. And you'll meet one of them tomorrow, Queen Rania. And it reminds me of Japan, because in Japan, actually, there's a lot less powerful women in the workplace, but they completely control the home. In Japan, we have a saying that says, men are little boys in armor, and women are iron fists and silk gloves, you know. And I think that, you know, it's again, there's definitely issues and definitely things to improve. I think, obviously in Japan too. But again, I think it's like, I meet some Americans, the first thing they say to my Arab friends, I hate the way you treat women, you know, and it's like, and that stereotype also, I just find, you know, I don't know what we can do about it. So,
again, I think for the most part it's inaccurate, and I can only, if I may personalize it to myself, 70% of people working at Bayt are women. If I look at my own family, I've got 3 sisters who've attended Stanford, Wellesley, and Wharton, and they've had extremely successful careers of their own, and their husbands have been supportive of that, as has their family. Practically all the women I know of my generation are working and have had great educations. And obviously there are different cultural norms than might exist in the US or in Europe. But these are cultural norms that are adopted generally by choice. They're not forced upon them. And I think one of the greatest misconceptions is there's a massive misconception that women tend to be forced into lots of ways of life that are they would not otherwise live in the region, and that might exist, but I would say in my experience it exists on the fringes. In my experience, and again I've lived in the Middle East most of my life, women play a very active role in the community and there are tons of success stories, and again you've hit on it correctly. Tomorrow we have a queen who is very representative of what women in the Middle East are now capable of and are actually doing, not just their capability and potential, but their actual execution.
So there's 20 seconds left. Do you have any final comments?
Well, I just want to say for everyone who's out there who's thinking about actually moving to the region or moving their products to the region, I very much encourage you to do so. There's plenty of other companies, Facebook and others. For example, Facebook missed the boat on translating, whereas Netlog has, and Netlog today is by far larger than Facebook in Saudi Arabia, for example. But I think everyone should look at the Middle East in a much more serious way from a business and from a cultural perspective.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much for a fantastic panel on the Middle East. Thank you, Joey.
Right, thank you.
And it only remains now to ask Loic and Geraldine to come out and join us.